You talk about risk appetite, right? I've been working with financial advisor. The first thing they ask me is, what is your, risk tolerance? They gave me assessment. All those I find is super helpful. I love to get your take on, especially I know Ivanti has a risk appetite statement template there, right? You can guide the organization to help them align their risk appetite with the actions they're taking. It would be really good to learn a little bit more about this framework and how you help organizations do so.
So we're part of the CTEP, CTEM, which is basically how we map to NIST CSF 2.0. And so there's a lot of interesting information there on how we handle things like with expanded scope, risk-based prioritization, and then outcome-based measurement. And this all ties to that framework. And again, going through kind of our, I would encourage them to go through our evaluation on the website, like I mentioned earlier, with respect to like risk appetite. That's very specific to an organization, right? So, they need to set kind of what their risk tolerance is. And that is, it's how okay you are, if you will, with getting that greater risk to reward ratio. That is, how much investment do you need to put in security controls against that acceptable level of residual risk. And so, and this it must include the cost of like patching exposures or, revising code, fixing misconfigurations, implementing other security measures and potential business disruptions, right? So that all has to be evaluated. And that's why I think exposure management is a very useful tool, because it, again, gives you a much more holistic view of that overall risk, right, that you're actually incurring. And then you can then make investments and then see how that, how your risk score changes based upon that, right? So you can see where you're getting your leverage, and it gives you a better way to think about like what risks are you taking on? Because again, you can apply security controls all day long. You can spend all your time doing that, and ultimately, you're still going to be insecure. There's just, you can't guarantee the security. The only thing I know that's fully secure is a brick. And those aren't very useful in cyber, for most businesses other than maybe construction. So in any case, there's always going to be a risk reward ratio, and the organizations have to do that, right? And so that's just key.
Yeah. There are also internal versus external factors, right? It could be organizational culture, industry regulations, financial stability. It could be geopolitics, right? All those could affect your risk. And then all those, as you said, the organization really need to really start with that first before you go make decisions on where you invest. But either way, exposure management should really give you that kind of, at least help you understand where you have vulnerabilities and then where you should prioritize your investment in cyber risk management.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier. That is, like the exploitability of, say, a vulnerability isn't necessarily correlated to its risk in terms of its exposure. That is, you could have something, again, with a very high score, like it's the CVSS score, but the opportunity to actually exploit that may be very low. Likewise, you may have, like, say, several CVEs with moderate to low CVSS scores, but in conjunction, they wind up being very much exploitable and very much a high threat to your business, because maybe it's going to leak data or things like that. And so these are the things that the various tools within exposure management help you better understand, and then you can prioritize where you're making these fixes and changes, where you get the most leverage. And I think that's the key, right? Is where do you get the most leverage for your investment, and then how do you view that in the context of your overall business objectives?
Yeah, you're right.